Notre Dame picked up Sam Hartman out of the transfer portal this past offseason, and now the quarterback is going to face off against his former team on Senior Day. Plus, Marcus Freeman confirmed what we already kind of knew when he announced that the Irish are going to look for another quarterback in the portal this offseason. All that and more on today's edition of Locked On Irish.
You are Locked On Irish, your daily podcast on the Notre Dame Fighting Irish. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello and welcome to Locked On Irish, your daily Notre Dame podcast. Today is Tuesday, November 14th, and thanks as always for making this your first listen of the day. I'm Tyler Wojciak, and I'm the host. I graduated from Notre Dame in 2018, and now I'm a producer covering college football at Fox Sports. And today's episode is sponsored by LinkedIn Jobs. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. That's why LinkedIn Jobs helps find the right people for your team faster and for free. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/LockedOnCollege. Terms and conditions apply. We got a really fun show for you today. The everyday listeners know that every Tuesday I'm joined by my old co-host Luke Smith. And even though we won't be doing our normal three things segment, we still covered a lot, including some unfortunate injury news out of South Bend, Sam Hartman going up against his former team, Marcus Freeman's plans to add another quarterback in the offseason, and a whole lot more, including a conversation about what's going on with Michigan and Jim Harbaugh. We covered a lot in this one. It went a little bit long, so let's get right into it. All right, Luke Smith is back with us here, and it's kind of hard to believe, but we only have 2 regular season games left, including the home finale against Wake Forest on Saturday. So let's just start there. How would you describe your feelings about the Wake game coming up?
Fairly indifferent about the game itself. Wake Forest isn't exactly the most exciting opponent in the world. Anytime you get the chance to watch Notre Dame play it at home, that's not something that you want to take advantage of or take for granted, I should say. So that'll be nice. But it is really strange that there are only 2 games left in this season. It's been a season that has both felt incredibly long in that the Ireland game feels like years ago, but also incredibly short because I can't believe Notre Dame has already played 10 games at this juncture.
I feel like October went by in the blink of an eye. I don't remember anything from it. Maybe the Ohio
It wasn't
State
exactly
game,
a great month, to be honest. The Louisville one was tough.
It was not. I think the Ohio State game just sort of blurred my memory. After that, I was sort of a corpse the rest of the season, just trying to get by week to week. No, but in all seriousness, yeah, it's hard to believe that we're already at this point, and this is going to be the 500th game in Notre Dame Stadium, I believe. I saw that going around online today. So, yeah, kind of a big one on Saturday in terms of the history and lore of the stadium, but not necessarily in the form of the opponent, Wake Forest, because Wake Forest comes to this game reeling. They got housed by NC State, who redshirted, or I shouldn't say they redshirted. Their quarterback decided that he was redshirting himself. Yeah, because he didn't want to play for NC State much longer, and he's going to enter the transfer portal. They just cannot get anything going offensively. And then there's obviously the headline that Sam Hartman is going up against his former team. Now, the fan feelings towards Sam Hartman have sort of changed ever since that Clemson game, but it's still a big game for him. It's a big game for all the seniors, and I think that's the main storyline that everyone's going to be talking about going into this matchup.
It definitely is. It's interesting, though, because, and maybe internally or privately there's a different sense, but I've never got the sense from Wake Forest that there was a lot of bitterness towards Sam Hartman, especially earlier in the year. Wake Forest fans were still like rooting him on, being incredibly complimentary of him. And obviously I know there's the whole thing with Dave Clawson where he talked about players being bought away, but he didn't really seem that bitter about it. He just kind of seemed to have a realization that this is the state of college football right now. So thinking about it from that angle too, it's interesting. I'm sure Wake Forest will obviously want to play well and win the game, but I don't know if there's really that extra level of motivation to beat Sam Hartman, just because I feel like that bitterness it didn't come through that clearly. And maybe that's what happens when a guy gives you 5 years.
Right. He had been around for so long. He had given everything to that program. And I think Sam Hartman looked around on the roster and was like, I don't know how good they're going to be this year. And he made the right decision to leave because you look at this Wake Forest team right now, they are really bad, especially on offense. Now, they did lose their best receiver, Donovan Green, to a season-ending injury very early on in the year. He's a future NFL draft prospect, so that was a tough loss for them, and the quarterbacks behind them, they just have not been able to figure it out. They've played 3 different quarterbacks so far this year, so obviously if Sam Hartman had stuck around, he would have been a lot better option than those guys, but still, the rest of the team is not that great. That's why they've struggled so far this year. I think after the NC State game, Dave Clawson said, "We've lost our way," which is never really a good thing to say
admit.
at the end of especially at this point in the season. So I'm with you. I don't think that the team is going to be like, oh, we gotta beat this guy. I think Sam Hartman, just based on what we've seen from the Notre Dame players so far this year, I think he's pretty well liked in locker rooms. And I actually think that if anyone's going to be emotional, it's probably going to be him. Do you think that his emotions will play a factor in this game?
I think his emotions will, and I think the fact that he just played one of the worst games of his collegiate career, and overall things have not gone the way he probably envisioned they would have. He has been having kind of a dip in production lately, and I could see his emotions affecting him a little bit early on and potentially even causing him to press a little bit in this game. I guess maybe the solution to him pressing is the fact that there aren't going to be a ton of receivers to try to press balls to just because they don't really move. But that could be an issue on Saturday. I could definitely see that, at least initially, being something that makes this game a little bit close early on.
Notre Dame is favored by 24.5 right now on FanDuel. I was pretty surprised by that number. I know that Wake Forest offense is terrible. I don't expect them to put up any points on Notre Dame, but their defense is pretty solid. They're only giving up 24.6 points per game. They're 41st points per drive, 14th in red zone scoring defense. So they definitely have the capability to present some problems for Notre Dame. They're actually one spot ahead of Notre Dame in third down defense. They are only allowing opponents to convert 36% of the time. But then again, North Carolina State absolutely just ran all over them. They finished with 266 rushing yards in that loss, or in that win rather, for NC State. So I feel like Sam Hartman is going to come out. He'll be emotional with it being senior day, going up against his former team. But you would think that if Notre Dame is able to run the ball on them, they should be able to win easily.
Correct. But I guess it kind of brings us to where we stand as far as the run game. It might have kind of a hodgepodge offensive line on Saturday. We learned that Rocco Spindler's out for the season with a knee injury. It's not clear to me what this knee injury is, but the fact that this happened this late in the year, I don't know if it happened in practice or what. I would think that would put him back or set him back for most of next year too, right?
It apparently happened during the Clemson game.
Interesting.
But
Okay.
he wasn't. I don't remember a point in that game where he was down on the field. So it must have happened.
And did he come out of the game? I don't remember that either.
Yeah, so Billy Strouth apparently finished that game because Kristofich hurt his ankle during that. So Strouth came in and he played. And in that same game,
Kristofich was playing center, though.
right, because Zeke Correll suffered a concussion, and he's still in
Right.
concussion protocol, so he might not even play on Saturday. So it looks like Ashton Craig is probably going to start at center unless Zeke is able to play on Saturday. I'm sure he's going to want to try and get out there as much as possible because it is senior day for him. But yeah, it's going to be a different group on the offensive line than what we've seen for most of the season. I think Pat Coogan will stay at left guard. Right now, it looks like Ashton Craig at center, and then Billy Strouth at right guard. And it's really unfortunate for Rocco Spindler because even though he's had his lapses at times this season, I think overall he's played fine. And you're right, this is probably going to affect him throughout the offseason because even though we haven't heard official confirmation about whether or not it was like an ACL or an MCL or a meniscus or anything like that, we do know he's having surgery, which means he's probably going to be out through the spring and potentially past that. So it sucks for Rocco Spindler, but potentially a good opportunity for Billy Strouth.
It is, and it makes you wonder what this offensive line might look like next year. I know that we're planning on talking about some of these guys that could come back, could have more eligibility, but it's a bit of a tryout for a couple guys that I think we anticipate could start next year, in both Ashton Craig at center and also Billy Strouth at guard. And maybe that does put Spindler in a position where he's more of a swing guy or just a reliever, if you will. I don't know, but that's something that we'll have to see going down the road. And this is a really good opportunity for those two young guys, both on Saturday and potentially in the Stanford game as well.
Yeah, speaking of which, that Stanford game, we also found out is going to be on the Pac-12 network. Potentially the last ever that's
You're not
ever.
going to that game, are you?
No, no.
Yeah, it's good choice.
I did 2 years ago, and it
Mhm.
turned out to be Brian Kelly's final game as the Notre Dame head coach. And that was an absolute sleeper. Like, I've been to several high school games that had more juice to it than that game.
Oh, yeah.
It didn't even feel real because the stadium was probably like 60% full. It was mostly Notre Dame fans. You could walk in and out, and I think we did to catch the end of the Auburn-Alabama game. Because that was when Brian Harson's terrible Auburn team nearly knocked off Bryce Young.
Right.
But
That
then,
could have put Notre Dame in the playoff,
Yeah.
potentially.
yeah, so we were like going in and out of that game. Have you ever been to that stadium?
Many, many years ago before they renovated it. I was there when Julius Jones ran for like 300 yards. So long time ago.
Yeah, it's an interesting place, and I don't think that there's going to be a packed house for that one either. But it's still like Stanford's been a feisty team this year. I think Wake Forest has been a feisty team too. So Notre Dame definitely has to come out and be ready to play against both of these teams. And now with a somewhat depleted offensive line, I think that does change things. But I mean, they should. I say they should, but so far what we've seen from this team this season, the one consistent thing about them is that they've been inconsistent.
Right. You don't know what you're going to get. I do think they'll be all right. I think Wake Forest defense, as you mentioned, is really not that bad. The thing that gives me a little bit of pause is I watched that Wake Forest Duke game, and the quarterback,
The
Mitch
Griffiths kid, yeah.
So obviously he had a couple plays where the ball just slipped out of his hands, and it's like I actually have no idea what just happened. But prior to that, he was kind of slinging it around. It kind of reminded me of an Everett Golson type of thing where has like strings like 20 completions in a row together and then just has some absolutely horrendous turnover. That's kind of the vibe I was getting from him. I think he struggled largely this year, but that Duke game, he actually had some moments where I'm like, how are these things happening in the same game? Because they do not add up.
I'm with you. I watched that game. It was on at the same time as some sleepy Thursday night terrible NFL game, and I had two TVs going. I found myself watching the college game way more, and I was like, who is this Griffiths kid? Because he was running around laying his body on the line. He had a touchdown there where he scrambled it and just launched his body into two defenders and got helicopter tackled into the end zone. And he was a feisty little dude, but I think he got pulled against NC State and he played terribly. So I think Michael Kern, who's, again, they've played three different quarterbacks this year. I don't think he's like significantly better than anyone, but I agree with you. When I watched that Duke game, I paused a little bit. I was like, are we really going to have to play this guy? Like, he had a play where he dropped back to pass and he tried to throw the ball. The ball, I guess it slipped out of his hands. It was not a forward motion, and it somehow managed to go like 20 yards down the field. It was one of the weirdest plays I've ever seen in a football game.
Yeah, he and like you mentioned, he's kind of just flinging his body all across the field and just getting thrown around. I thought one of these days he's going to potentially lose his life on a football field if he keeps playing like that. So it sounds like it might not be Saturday if he's not going to start, but I guess we'll see.
Yeah, I don't know who's going to be their starting quarterback, at least right now, because, like I said, Kern played the end of the NC State game, but it could be Griffiths. He's played the bulk of the snaps this year for them. We'll be right back with Luke to talk more about Notre Dame's game against Wake Forest and the future of the quarterback position. But first, I wanted to talk to you about Jase Medical. I spend a lot of time talking with you about wins, losses, who starts, and who sits. I'm thankful for that connection, but today I want to talk about something a little more personal. Whether you're on extended travel, bracing for a major weather event, or limited by yet another supply shortage, Jase Medical has you covered. Jase Medical provides life-saving antibiotics and a long list of daily medications that can be ordered in a 1-year supply. Even ED generics for Cialis, Viagra, and Revatio prescriptions. Go online right now at jasemedical.com to receive your 12-month supply of your daily medication. Remember to use promo code LOCKEDON for $20 off your purchase. A verified customer had this to say about Jase. Quote, I'm so thankful for this service. Supply chain issues caused me to cut bills in half to have it, so I ordered most of my daily meds with the year supply. I also ordered an antibiotic kit, and I finally feel secure. Prices are lower than local pharmacies, and I highly recommend this for everyone. End quote. If you or someone you love would get some peace of mind by having a year supply of any daily medication, go to jasemedical.com to see if it's offered for you. Remember to use promo code LOCKEDON for $20 off your purchase. For Notre Dame, we got some quarterback news on Monday as well. Marcus Freeman said what we all pretty much knew already, that Notre Dame was going to look to add a fourth scholarship quarterback this offseason. I thought it was pretty funny that he did not say definitively, we are going to add a transfer portal quarterback. He did say that they are certainly going to look in the portal, but I thought it was a very diplomatic response because a few weeks ago, you and I talked about how I thought Freeman put himself into a corner when he said that they were going to make a decision about the quarterback position during the second bye. And I was like, that's weird because then you have to basically say, you have to get a quarterback, and that might suggest that you don't believe in the guys you currently have in that room. Freeman found a good way out of it. I don't think anyone expects Notre Dame to just randomly pick up another high school prospect a month before early signing day in the same class where they have C.J. Carr, who's been committed for over a year now. So it's clear they're going to add a transfer quarterback. What did you think about what Marcus Freeman had to say about it in the Monday press conference?
Well, also, what's his name? Ron Powless the third could also just unretire medically, and maybe we put him back on scholarship. He's got some eligibility left, right?
I think so. He'd be the first to unmedically retire.
He was on scholarship, believe it or not. But anyways, I thought it was interesting, and I kind of felt like it didn't get enough chatter, to be honest, because where my mind went was this to me probably gives some inspiration to definitely Steve Angeli to just hit the portal, I would think, after the Stanford game. And I know that the talk has been they'll compete, and this guy that they're going to bring in, whoever it may be, probably isn't going to be at the same level as a Sam Hartman, and it might be more of a true competition. But you go back to last year where Freeman sat down with Pine and Buckner and told them, hey, we're going to bring in somebody else. Pine immediately hit the portal. Buckner obviously did eventually in the spring as well. And I think that Freeman is not like some other college football coaches, and that maybe he wants to be more upfront with his players. And that's why he's probably to tell them, like, we're going to look elsewhere just to make this room as good as we can. But it might be at his disadvantage doing that, because I wonder, does this motivate Steve Angeli now to hit the portal? Because to me, what this says is they don't trust him to be the starting quarterback.
Yeah, and even though Freeman went out of his way to say that this is not a reflection of his confidence in the quarterbacks in the room, I think
it's hard to see it otherwise.
From the outside, you're like, okay, well, if you really believed in, Angeli or Minchie or one of these guys, then, you'd probably just ride with them and see how it plays out. I would be surprised if Angeli transfers immediately after the season. I think he could definitely transfer after the spring. I think he'd probably wait and see who Notre Dame gets in the portal, compete in the spring, and then if it becomes clear that he's not going to be the starter next season, then yeah, he can leave and do exactly what Tyler Buckner did and leave after spring practice. But you're right. I don't think that there is a Sam Hartman in the transfer portal, and people keep asking, like, who is Notre Dame looking at? Who are they going to add? I don't think anyone knows. I'm sure that there's people on the Notre Dame coaching staff who have an idea of who's going to enter the transfer portal. Freeman even said you can't start your evaluation on a player once they enter the portal. You got to be doing that research beforehand and figuring out, hey, who's going to be in, who do we have a shot with, so that way you can get a head start. So once they enter the portal, you've already made up your mind about whether or not you want to pursue that player. And this goes for every position. This isn't just quarterback either. So I'm sure they have some insight into who's going to enter the portal. But, like, I look at some of these articles online and, like, guys like Tyler Van Dyke, or, he just got benched at Miami. Michael Pratt's a name that gets thrown around, but I think he's going to go to the NFL draft. He'll probably get drafted this year. None of the names really jump off the page to me. But then again, Sam Hartman wasn't even an option, at least in our minds at this time last year. So I really don't know who they're going to take. And there's a good chance it could be a player who's as good, if not maybe even worse than Steve Angeli.
So I'm going to briefly push back on that because actually, I don't know why I was even looking at old texts, but last year when Hartman played against Louisville and had like 6 turnovers in a quarter or whatever, you and I were having a conversation. Maybe we don't want him after all. I think somebody had alluded to it in a mailbag. It wasn't as definitive as it became later on, but like there was some discussion about that. And hey, I don't know. Maybe we were onto something there. Yeah. I'm kidding, but not really. I don't know who a reasonable target is. And you're right. This thing is going to flesh itself out more clearly as time goes on. But as Freeman said, they have to start doing their evaluations now. And frankly, you have to start evaluating who can you back channel with right now too. Like how do we get in contact with his high school coach or some family member? I don't know. Like that's the reality of the situation. You have to do these things now.
People bring up Riley Leonard, the quarterback for Duke. I know he played with an injury after the Notre Dame game, but even before that, like I didn't think
he was that good.
He's a good athlete. He's a good runner, but as like a passer, I've never understood the hype around him and the fact that people were talking about him as like a future first round NFL draft pick. I just did not get that at all. But I guess if Mike Elko were to leave Duke, he'd probably be one of the top quarterbacks in the portal. Would Notre Dame be willing to go after him? I think the most realistic option right now for Notre Dame, and again, I don't even know if this player is even going to enter the transfer portal, is Kansas State quarterback Will Howard, because Kansas State has a true freshman right now in Avery Johnson, someone who Notre Dame actually kind of looked at, but they didn't really evaluate him that hard because they were trying to get Dante Moore. Anyway, that's besides the point. Will Howard has been around for a long time. He's played a lot of football. I think he's played some pretty good football. He's also played some pretty bad football at times, but I think he's a good option. I think he'd be more in like the Jack Cohn tier. And look, like it wasn't always pretty with Cohn, but Notre Dame did finish 11-1 with him as the starting quarterback, and especially at the end of the year, that offense is humming with him. So I think that'd be a good option. I think it would be a legitimate quarterback competition, but I think that's the type of caliber Notre Dame is probably going to look to acquire in the transfer portal.
That makes sense. It is funny to think back on Jack Cohn, and particularly that Fiesta Bowl game, as I'm watching Georgia play Ole Miss the other night, and who comes in for Jackson Dart but Spencer Sanders, after we made that guy look like a Heisman winner in the second half of that game 2 years ago. But more importantly, Cohn threw like 54 passes in that game, which is also hilarious to look back on. I mean, if you're telling me you can get somebody at Jack Cohn's level, hopefully a little bit more mobile, no offense, Jack, I'd be okay with that.
Well, Will Howard can run. He's a big dude, man.
Yeah.
And he won the Big 12 championship. He beat TCU last year. So I think he's a good option. And, let's see if he even enters the portal. I could just see a situation where Kansas State wants to move on. Are there any other names out there that I'm missing that you think Notre Dame could potentially have a shot with?
Yeah, Tyler Buckner. No, somebody actually tried to tell me the other day, I don't know where they got this information from, that Tyler Buckner was actually going to transfer back to Notre Dame to play lacrosse, and I laughed in their face. But they were very convicted that this was happening, so go figure.
Can we get him and Reese?
Yeah.
Yeah. I think I just pissed off a lot of people with that comment. Before Luke and I play a new game on the show, I wanted to tell you about LinkedIn Jobs. These days, every new potential hire can feel like a high-stakes wager for your small business. You want to be 100% certain that you have access to the best qualified candidates available, and that's why you have to check out LinkedIn Jobs. LinkedIn Jobs has find the right people for your team faster and for free. I used LinkedIn Jobs a couple years ago, and they made it easy to contact their hiring manager, learn more about the role, and eventually, I got the job. LinkedIn also makes it incredibly easy to create a free job post on LinkedIn Jobs. All you have to do is add your job and the purple hashtag hiring frame to your LinkedIn profile to spread the word that you're hiring. Simple tools like screening questions make it easy to focus on candidates with just the right skills and experience so you can quickly prioritize who you'd like to interview and hire. We all know hiring people can be time-consuming, but adding the right team member can be invaluable to your business, and LinkedIn Jobs makes it easier than ever. It's why small businesses rate LinkedIn Jobs #1 in delivering quality hires versus leading competitors. LinkedIn Jobs helps you find the qualified candidates you want to talk to faster. Post your job for free at linkedin.com/lockedoncollege. That's linkedin.com/lockedoncollege to post your job for free. Terms and conditions apply. Let's move back to senior day, and let's do a little game here because as we're talking about the transfer portal, Notre Dame is certainly going to be looking to add guys in the portal, but they're probably going to lose some guys as well, and they're also going to lose some guys to the NFL, just graduation, things like that. So on Saturday, Notre Dame is going to honor 31 players, which, by the way, that has to be some sort of a record, right, on senior day?
It's like Minnesota's 31 captains like a couple years ago.
Yeah, exactly. So they're going to honor 31 players for senior day, but only 7 of them are exhausting their eligibility this season. Sam Hartman, Javonte Jean-Baptiste, DJ Brown, Thomas Harper, Spencer Schrader, Michael Vincent, and Matt Salerno. And even Salerno could theoretically come back for a 7th year because he's a de facto medical redshirt this season, but that leaves 24 other players who have the option to either stay or go. So Luke and I are going to play a little game called Stay or Go. I'm going to say the name of a senior on Notre Dame's roster, and then Luke, you tell me if you think this player will stay at Notre Dame or go elsewhere. And if you say go, you'll have to say whether or not it's the NFL or if they transfer elsewhere. So we don't have any like inside information here. We are just predicting what we think is going to happen. Does that sound good to you?
Sounds like a plan. Yeah.
All right. First up, Chris Tyree.
I'm going to say stay. I know that I think there was a report out there a couple weeks ago that maybe he might transfer, but I still think it makes sense, and I think he will stay.
I think he's going to stay. I also think that he is going to look around. He might not enter the portal, but I think he's going to see what options are out there. But I think ultimately he will stay. All right. Zeke Correll.
I think he's going. I don't think that he necessarily has an NFL future, but he's a guy that I'm not sure playing another year of college football helps his NFL prospects at all. Frankly, he just doesn't really have an NFL future. He's a smaller guy. I think it's probably time maybe to play around with some practice squad stuff. And I think Notre Dame's pretty high on Ashton Craig. So, well, I'm sure they'd like him back from a leadership standpoint. He hasn't had a great year, and they might just be ready to turn the page there.
I think he goes as well. I think he just gives a shot at the NFL. And I think, especially depending on what happens these next few games with Ashton Craig, that might make the decision for him. We'll keep it on the offensive line. Andrew Kristofich.
He's going to go like work construction in Pittsburgh or something. I don't know what the hell that guy's doing, but he's not playing football again.
I agree. I think he's gone too. Nana Osafo-Mensah.
This is an interesting one. And admittedly, I don't have a ton of conviction here, but I'm going to say he stays. I would not be shocked if he transferred, just because there might be some younger players that are taking some snaps away from him next year. But I think that Notre Dame values him as a leader on defense, and I think that there's definitely going to be a roster spot for him.
I think he stays. I think Notre Dame definitely wants him. He'd be a 6-year senior. He'd be a veteran leader, and even though he might have to split some of those reps with underclassmen, I think he could definitely be a big contributor on the field and off the field for Notre Dame next season. And I think he's just a Notre Dame guy. He will eventually stay. Okay, Jordan Botelho.
I think he goes, and I think he's transferring. He could come back, but this is a guy that, frankly, him graduated from Notre Dame, given all of the things he's gone through at Notre Dame, some of them self-inflicted, obviously, but him graduating is an accomplishment in itself, and he's been fine this year. It's not like he's been great. He's not been bad either, but I think there are some younger players Notre Dame's pretty high on, and I think that it might make sense for him to just go somewhere else and just worry about football for a year and see what that does for him, because I don't think he's going to get drafted if he goes to the NFL right now, but I think he has some ability, and if he goes somewhere else and just sees what that's like, I think that makes the most sense for him.
I agree. I think he goes. I think he transfers elsewhere, and I think it's just one of those circumstances where
kind of like Kevin Austin. Like, hey, I've been at South Bend for too long. I had a lot of trouble here. I made it through. It's time for me to go.
Yeah, you got your degree, and you move on to the next place. Maybe he goes closer to home. I don't think he's put nearly enough good stuff on tape to get drafted, even though he plays one of the most coveted positions. And I think he'd probably test pretty well in like a combine pro day setting, but I think he still has a lot more to do at the college level before a team takes a chance on him in the NFL. So I think he's going to transfer as well. That opens up opportunities for like Junior Tui Alamaka, Josh Burnham, and then Boubacar Traore, who really flashed against USC. This next one's probably an easy one. Howard Cross.
I think he goes to the NFL. He's had an All-American type season. Smaller guy, but NFL scouts do really seem to like him despite his lack of size. I think he's not going to have a better year. It'd be next to impossible. He's got to go to the NFL right now.
I agree. I think he goes to the NFL. I don't think there's anything he could do that's going to drastically improve his draft stock because he's not getting taller between this year and next year. This one is a little bit interesting, though. Riley Mills.
Yeah, this one is tricky because he's had a good year, not a great year, but he does have the projectables where if he really had another great year in college, he might be able to shoot up draft boards a little bit. So I'm going to say he's coming back to Notre Dame, but I would not be surprised if that's not the case.
I think he will choose to go to the NFL. I think he should stay for that reason. I think Riley Mills is also a player who could be swayed by NIL money. I think that he's a good enough player that you should want to invest in. If you're Notre Dame in the NIL department, I think he's done enough. He'd be a leader next year on that team. He'd be one of the better players on the defensive line. And he's had sort of I don't want to say up and down career, but he had really high expectations going into last season, didn't live up to those, moved back to his natural position. And despite a somewhat rocky start, I thought he has really come on during the second half of the year. I hope that he stays and continues to build on that momentum because I think he could have a really great season next year for Notre Dame. But I just think that he's been around for a long time. He's going to want to go give it a shot in the NFL because I think he's going to test really well. And maybe that alone is enough to move him up draft boards and get a decent payday. All right, J.D. Bertrand.
I don't know if he'll get drafted, but I think it's time for him to go to the NFL. He's been about as productive as he can be over 3 years, even if people don't want to hear that. And he's had some injury stuff. I think that he's another guy that's, especially the position he plays, it's not like he's ever going to shoot up draft boards by having another strong season. So I think it's just probably time to move on.
I'm with you. I think he's going to end up leaving. I don't think there's anything more he could do at the college level. This really just comes down to how bad does this guy want to play football next year? Because if all he wants to do is play football, he comes back next year, leads the team in tackles, all that good stuff. But if he wants to give the NFL a shot, there's really no point in waiting. He should go now because his stock isn't getting any higher. Okay, Jack Kaiser.
This one is tricky. I think if you had asked me a couple of weeks ago, I probably would have said that I think he was going to go, but he was going to transfer somewhere else, somewhere where he could play more snaps. And that still could happen. But this is a guy that he played a lot against Clemson. And he
played well too.
Yeah. He's got 2 degrees at least already from Notre Dame. Like, do you want another one? Maybe. And maybe that's who he is. Maybe he's just a Notre Dame guy and he figures I will come back for one more year. But I'm going to say he's going to go elsewhere just because I think that makes the most sense for him. I could be wrong on that, but I think he's going to transfer somewhere for one last year.
Do you think he's going just so he could be the feature guy, play like 60 snaps a game, never come off the field?
Yeah, that's my thought process.
Yeah. I'm going to take
hard.
a bit.
I don't know.
Yeah. He's also an Indiana guy, so he's already kind of close to home. I think he stays because I think what's going to happen, and this sort of leads into the next one, I think J.D. Bertrand is definitely gone, and I think Maris Liufau is gone as well, which I think opens the door for Jack Kaiser to stay and play a lot next season. Now, if Liufau were to stay, that changes things. Because I think that in that case, Jack Kaiser stays at the rover position. He's still splitting snaps. He might not be on the field that much, and that'd be a lot to come back for another year of college football and not be the feature player. But I think that brings us to Maris. What do you think he's going to do?
So I personally thought he would stay, but I could be dead wrong on that. He might think he's already ready for the NFL, but he really hasn't played that much football. I think he should come back. But if you think otherwise, I wouldn't be shocked if he just figures, hey, it's time to go to the NFL. If he leaves, then yeah, I could definitely see Kaiser coming back.
Yeah, I just think he will leave. There's certainly reasons why he should come back. Your point about him not playing that much college football, like he hasn't played college football at a high level for that long. He's definitely had his moments this year when I thought he's been playing really well. But there's been some instances, especially in that Clemson game, where he sort of reverted back to 2022 Maris Liufau. But again, this is a guy who's been around for a really long time, and I just think that he's gonna move on. So I guess if I had to predict, I think he will give the NFL a try. I don't think he's going to transfer, but I think he's just kind of in the situation where, like, if not now, when? Okay, next one, Cam Hart.
I think he's going to the NFL. I don't know what round he's going to get drafted in. Could be 3rd round, 4th round, but I think he's had a great year with all of his injury concerns. I frankly forgot he had eligibility left. Like, I think it's time for him to move on.
Yeah, we all thought he was gone after last season. He kind of surprised us all when he decided to come back, but it turned out to be a really good decision for him because I think he greatly improved his draft stock. Also, I think a plane is landing on top of my garage right now. Do you hear that?
Oh, is that what that was? I thought that was my phone, but it's not.
No. Yeah. If I die during the middle of this podcast, notice a plane crash in West LA. Okay. On a brighter note, Clarence Lewis, CPA, is he getting a head start in his accounting career, or does he stick around at Notre Dame for one more year?
Yeah, he's getting his MSA somewhere and trying to play football. It's not going to be Notre Dame. I do think he's elsewhere next year.
I agree. I think he transfers, makes perfect sense for him. He's been around Notre Dame for a long time, but if he wants to continue playing football and get the most action possible, it's not going to be at Notre Dame because it sounds like Christian Gray and Jane Mickey have already jumped him. Okay, 2 more. Xavier Watts, first up.
Xavier Watts is tough because obviously he's been incredibly productive this season and particularly the last couple weeks, but that's a guy who hasn't played a lot of safety at the collegiate level, really. I know that he played it in parts of 3 seasons now, but he's really starting to come into his own now. And I haven't admittedly looked at what the NFL thinks of him yet. I haven't seen a whole lot on that, but I think it makes sense for him to come back one last year. And I think that's another guy that Notre Dame could persuade to come back with a little bit of NIL backing. I think it makes sense, and I think he will be back next year.
I think he's definitely going to ask for the NFL draft feedback, and I think that he's going to find out that he should stay at Notre Dame and that Notre Dame is going to offer him a raise because this is his second full – actually, you could make the case that this is his first full season when he started at safety and he finished at safety because even last year they were cross-rating him a little bit at wide receiver just because that position was so thin. Xavier Watts has had an incredible season. 7 interceptions is insane. He's been Notre Dame's best playmaker over these past few weeks. He's also only 5'11" and 198. And I think that there are times, especially in that Ohio State game, where like a more critical eye, like an NFL scout is going to look at his tape and say like, okay, this interception when the ball sort of tipped right to you against Clemson was great, but like there's probably some things that we aren't seeing because we aren't NFL scouts. And they might say, hey, stick around, play in college for one more year, be like the guy on Notre Dame's defense. Like he'd probably be the leader, one of the best players, one of the most talked about players throughout the whole offseason. And I think that is more valuable than being like at best like a fringe 6th, 7th round pick. I just don't think he's going to be drafted that high because I don't think he's going to blow anyone away with his measurables either.
Right. No, I agree. I think that makes sense.
All right, last one, Ramon Henderson.
So when I first thought about him, I thought maybe transfer. But now as I'm starting to think about it, I sort of think he's going to be back next year and just kind of be next year's DJ Brown. And hopefully that doesn't mean dropping picks and horrible run fits on blitzes. But basically a guy who in theory has been around for forever at the safety position, knows what he's supposed to do, and can get you a lot of snaps. I could see that for him. I know there's some younger players Notre Dame likes at safety, but I don't know that there's a definitive answer as to who they want to start next to Watts next year. So I think it makes sense for him to come back.
Yeah, this one is tricky because I think it depends on how the coaching staff views Adon Schuler, Ben Minnick, and their progress as true freshmen. We've seen Schuler get some playing time in different spots. I think Minnick has played on some special teams as well. But I don't think either of them are, at least at this point, maybe they make the jump going into their second season where they're all of a sudden splitting reps with Ramon. But I think that Notre Dame could benefit if Ramon Henderson decided to stay at Notre Dame, but he's not going to the NFL. If he decides to transfer elsewhere, it wouldn't shock me. But for the sake of this exercise, I am going to say stay. All right, so that is it. That's all the seniors who will be honored for Notre Dame on Saturday, minus a few walk-ons. Did not include them in this, but shout out Wapu Nation. Now, as we wrap things up, we have not really talked about it, Luke, but you got any thoughts on what's going on in Michigan?
You mean America's team?
America's team, baby. Jim Harbaugh is the wall that viruses shatter against.
Pretty unreal line. I mean, I think the Stallions guy is unreal. He's kind of a legend. But, yeah, I've got a buddy who's a Michigan fan, and it is incredible just how he can't take a single chirp about this thing. Like, they are the most defensive people on the planet about it. And, like, I get it. It's your team and all, but I don't know. This all seems pretty blatant to me. And just seeing the victim card that even the president of the university at Michigan is wearing is just, quite frankly, despicable, but exactly what you'd expect from that institution. So I'm not surprised by any of it. The coach's speech the other day was absolutely embarrassing. Just like, what are you crying about, dude? That I had like the big time Eloy Jimenez when the White Sox like held his jersey up in the locker room.
Yeah,
after
because he suffered a season-ending injury.
Yeah, like he's always with us. That's what I got. I don't know. I just can't stand those guys, and I can't believe it, but man, I really just want Ohio State to beat the doors off them. And I was not impressed with them at all on Saturday. Like, you're watching some of the later games and people are talking about how exceptional JJ McCarthy was. He didn't throw the ball in the second half. So,
yeah, I really hope Ohio State wins that game. And maybe that's the worst part in all of this is that I'm going to be rooting hard for the Buckeyes on that Saturday. Maybe harder than I've ever rooted for Ohio State before. Actually, almost certainly. that's going to be the case, because this stuff is just so ridiculous. And I got to admit, I was pretty frustrated when I heard about the suspension for Jim Harbaugh, especially dishing that out before you even completed the investigation. Congrats to the Big Ten. They somehow they somehow managed to find a way to administer a punishment that pissed off everyone. Like, no one's happy. Even the people who are like not Michigan fans who think that they should be punished for this are like, wait, what are you doing this? Why are you doing this now? Because the investigation isn't even complete. And now you actually give Michigan like a decent counter. They could just say, well, you didn't finish the investigation. You handed out this punishment. Now you're going to hand out more once the investigation is completed. But I have found a lot of humor in it. The Connor Stallion stuff, to your point, he's a legend. I think I would love to just have like a 30-minute conversation with him to ask him what his deal is, like the vacuum stuff. And when he was saying that this was all a plot because the Michigan State fan from down the street. And then we haven't even talked about him being on the sideline for Central Michigan during a game against Michigan State.
And they still haven't figured out the identity of that
because
guy.
It's him, because it's Connor Stallions.
I mean, McElwain just calling him, the photo of the sign-stealing guy going around, that gave me a good laugh.
I just want to know, like, how many people on the Central Michigan sideline knew that he was affiliated with Michigan, because he was so clearly him.
What is interesting is that I remember I was at a bar during that game, and that game was on, and it was actually like really close for a while.
Yeah, the first half, they really hung around.
And then when I, like months later, I'm like, I wonder if like he was doing that. I don't know. But I remember like it was kind of a close game for a while, which even though Michigan State's terrible, obviously, but I don't know. Just crazy stuff.
Yeah, the most ridiculous part about Michigan's letter, either to the Big Ten or the NCAA, like after all these accusations were coming out, they basically acted like Connor Stallions was some entry-level video intern that no one even talked to or no one even cared for, no one cared for their opinion. And then all these videos come out where Minter and Moore are like literally right next to Connor Stallions and just like waiting for every word that he says, and they're all responding based off what Connor Stallions is telling them. Then there's him with Harbaugh. There's just a ton of stuff. It's so ridiculous. But maybe the biggest punishment in all this, because I don't think the NCAA, I mean, they might decide to punish Michigan like a decade from now. I think maybe the worst thing that's going to happen to them throughout this entire process is, one, that there's this black cloud hanging over what should be their dream season, and two, I just don't see any scenario where Jim Harbaugh is the coach of them next season, because he's probably like, I'm done with this. I've peaked at Michigan. I'm going to the NFL.
Yeah, and there's no reason. I don't think he'll ever coach a game at Michigan again, to be honest with you, because I don't think this thing is going to get resolved over the course, even though it's only for the regular season. If they do make the playoff, I don't see that changing. I think it's a mess. But it's the mess that they created, even if they don't want to acknowledge that, which is the most infuriating thing of all. But it's exactly what you would expect from that institution. So I don't know. I feel like university presidents need to just be ripping on Santaono because he's an absolute clown.
All right. I think we covered the Michigan portion. I assume you're going to the game on Saturday?
I'm scheduled to. We will see. It depends on some things. No, the weather actually looks good. It's like 50 degrees. I just I've been gone a lot lately, and the idea of coming to South Bend for a Wake Forest game isn't the most appealing one, but likely we'll be there.
Yeah, I have a feeling you'll be there. All right, we will see you again next week to talk about everything from that game. Until then.
Sounds good.
All right, that's going to do it for this episode. Thanks again for making Locked On Irish your first listen of the day. Right now, the plan is to talk some recruiting, and tomorrow's episode, I'm going to have Locked On's very own recruiting insider Brian Smith back on to talk about Notre Dame's class of 2024, because we're just over 1 month away from early signing day, and then we'll start to look ahead to the class of 2025. Be sure to subscribe to the show on YouTube or wherever you're listening to the podcast. Also, please give us a follow on social media. The X account is @LockedOnIrish. Instagram is @LockedOnIrishPod. And my personal Twitter account is @TylerWOJCIAK. Same time, same place tomorrow, guys. See you then.